Okay, welcome, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions. It is Wednesday, February 12th. We're going to be working on H-176, but before we get there, I just want to bring the committee up to speed on a conversation I had this morning with the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, Robin Scheid, about the budget adjustment language in the appropriations bill about the catch fund. And I know it was talked about yesterday, maybe having a joint meeting between the two committees. She was like, that's 22 members talking about a real complicated issue that has its own little nuance. So she and I spoke of strategy. I'll update you now that we have Representative Lund. Come on in. I know you were here at 10 o'clock. We were on a break. The schedule just got screwed up. So thank you for coming in at the last minute.
Yes, and I will be very, very brief as well.
We will be too.
Because I don't know really extensively what DOC is currently doing with work crew, but I can tell you as far as background, this is work crew, I assume.
This is work crew, it's H-176, so some folks have the paper copy. If you don't,
We all do.
Yeah.
So by way of
26.
Background and why I brought this bill. So a couple years ago, 2 years ago, that Department of Corrections decided to stop work crew. Work crew is a sentence that states attorneys, defense counsel, courts have all very much appreciated, and essentially an individual, and it's often even at arraignment, it's very early in the process, that they will have a plea agreement where there's work crew assigned, and it would be like 2 weeks of work crew that you have to go out and mow the lawns in the cemetery, and it seems to be the standard option that I hear about. But and if they don't show up, they go directly to prison for that period of time, like the 14 days. So there's a consequence if they don't show up. They don't have to go back through court, but that's the agreement. And the key is that this has been a very successful tool in the past for clearing cases early. And the reason I put in this bill is, well, last year in a bill, in a law we passed, we reestablished the community restitution is what it's called in the statute. And the Department of Corrections came up with a different kind of program. And what I've heard from all those individuals I mentioned before, defense counsel, prosecutors, and the courts, is nobody's using it because it's just doesn't work. It's not something that really works. So to get the conversation going again with our friends at the Department of Corrections, I put in the bill that essentially says you need to go back to exactly what you had before. That doesn't mean that that's necessarily where it will end up. But I want to make it kind of very clear that this is a really important tool. We need to somehow make it work. So that's about all I have.
That's very helpful, Martin. I really appreciate it. And I think for the committee, this bill covers both our committee as well as judiciary, because the work crew model and how it operates is under DOC. It's DOC that operates the work crew, pays for it, and all of that. It is a tool that's used with our state's attorneys and defense counsel and the courts as a sentencing option.
Right.
So that piece of this whole issue is in House Judiciary's purview. Establishing a work crew working with DOC is in our purview. So we'll be working with your committee if we decide to work on this bill. We'll be working with your committee in terms of how the sentencing works with a work crew. The question is, the current structure of a work crew that was put in place last summer is not working. And if we go back to the way work crews were structured before, there's DOC staff that's needed. There's money from DOC's budget that needs to go to this. And that's one of the reasons that DOC made the recommendation to do away with work crews, because they weren't getting enough folks coming in, but it was really expensive because of having to have staff overseeing the crews. So that's what we're gonna have to work with DOC if we decide to work on the bill. For that. Brian?
Was that the logic behind the change? It was too expensive, so let's do it. Why did things change to begin with? If it was so great.
And we can talk to this
Yeah.
as we get going, but it was more expensive to run it. And also they weren't having as many participants. And of course, COVID got
Right. It was right after.
impacted by COVID because all the work crews came to a halt.
Exactly.
Will, and then Gina?
So you kind of answered that, Alice. Is this rescinding memorandum? There's two of them referenced here, 339 and 392. So those, I'm assuming that those were issued because of the cost of the program and that they just weren't sustainable in the moment, right?
You'd have to.
I'd ask,
Okay.
okay.
And then he would be the.
Okay, so then the second part of that question was in section 1B on line 7 and 8, it says, that the Department of Corrections may enact policies limiting the number of days ordered. I'm assuming that may is in there because it's up to the department to determine the sustainability of whether or not they could do that work crew for a given period of time, right? Is that why there's flexibility in that?
It's probably more to it than that. And when you get, hopefully, very much hoping you get into this, I would also suggest you hear from prosecutors and the courts and the defense counsel. So they'd be in a better position to answer that as well.
And you said the attorney?
Yeah, the prosecutors.
The whole, the Attorney General, they hear the whole gamut. And while I think that when we get into that, would it be helpful to have a member of your committee sit in when we take that testimony? Okay. Why don't you see who that could?
I'll probably send some over. Well, there's several people who've signed on to this bill, as you've seen from the Judiciary Committee. So
Well, I'm not gonna slight your committee. I want to be real clear about that. Part of this is your committee.
we do have an advocate for it here too, that Gina signed on.
Yeah, and I'd just like to thank you, Representative Lalonde, for coming in and getting this conversation started, because I've got a lot of friends, family, and employees that have participated in the work crew program over the years. And it's not just about the cost of the program fiscally, it's also the benefit of the program for morale and for what people feel like they're doing for their community while they're taking part in the program. So thank you.
And that's what Judge, and they said last year that they wanted it as another, as a continued tool.
So if we work on the bill and if we want to reconstitute a work crew model, it's working with the Department of Corrections and it's going to impact their budget. Going to be a big impact on their DOC budget. So that will be the other thing we need to weigh here. Oh, well,
Do we know what the fiscal impact would be?
we'll get
That-
into
that's
that.
still
We'll
there,
get
okay.
into that. So this is just preliminary from the report, just to see if this is something we want to schedule some more time.
So yes, I mean, there's a cost there, but there's certainly different kind of costs in the court. Even court time, prosecutor time, defender time, but beyond that, it's the ability to have swift consequences that this provides, which is critical for public safety. And this is a tool that helps us get that. And of course, I understand DOC has a budget, but that should be definitely front and center for us, I think, as far as, this being an effective tool for quick consequences.
So in the absence of work crew now, what kind of consequences are there for individuals who would formerly have been involved in work crew?
I mean, it
If any.
depends. I mean, it depends. But the part of the issue is that these are usually lower level offenses. They're not prioritized in the court right now. Some could be sent to diversion, but others would wait for court time before they're usually resolved through plea bargaining. And it could involve the deferred sentence, it could involve probation, treatment, or incarceration. But could be months after we could actually have a work crew sentence imposed.
So is the not having work crew as a tool for the courts, is that exacerbating docket loads?
That's my understanding, and that's definitely a good question for Judge Zone as well.
Questions? So these, usually the folks who are on work crews, usually it's misdemeanors. You're not really looking at felonies.
Understanding, correct.
And it could be property crimes. It's more your low levels, not your violent offenders, it's not your violent crimes. It's more your, so instead of taking up a corrections bed or staying under the supervision of DOC very long, it can be harmful. It's like, let's get some ramifications for their behavior quickly.
When you mentioned swift consequence, could you explain how quickly the judiciary would be able to reinstitute this policy if we put it in statute?
So, I mean, they'd be able to do it as soon as that's available. I mean, the work crew that DOC has now is available, it's just not being used. Because, you know, and you'll have to hear more from the prosecutors and defense counsel and courts for why, you know, rather than hearing from me. But again, I've been told again and again, asked this question of the folks who are actually running the system, that often at arraignment, which is very early in the process, that a plea deal can be reached with a work crew option. Which is much earlier than if it goes through the normal process to pre-trial and trial.
And so saving time, money, getting those people off the docket. So it's like opening up, you know, brain space. Okay, so there's a big positive there too.
But it's someone else's budget.
But it's somebody else's budget.
That's what you gotta, that means you gotta balance
Some
it.
details we're gonna wanna fresh.
Yeah, it's someone else's budget, so judiciary's budget, as well as its community public safety. If there's immediate consequences for someone's behavior.
Yeah.
But there is a real impact on DOC.
Yes.
That's what we need to look at is, because DOC is the one that's going to be putting together a work crew. So that's what we need to look at and be cognizant of the cost of that. Kevin?
In the successful program, were those who were performing the work, were they taking a load off of some other budget? They would, the community would have been paying for that work to be done? And by the work crew doing it, we're offsetting,
Yeah, that's my understanding that, I
well,
mean,
is
that's
that
not
the way it
a,
worked, or is that,
that's my understanding. That's wasn't really what's driving it, but yeah.
no, it may not have been a driver, but if,
Our cemeteries were much better mowed and taken care of back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, they own cemeteries, basically. So that cost would have come from a municipality, or
Right.
if it was a church cemetery, it'd come from the church coffers. Okay, Troy, there you go.
You opened it. I was gonna stay quiet. What I'm hearing is, we're concerned that the municipalities have lost a free labor a chunk of free labor. Is that what I'm hearing? Does that feel accurate?
Could be.
You'll have to ask DOC that one.
Since they're plea dealing it, since they're taking a plea deal, it's volunteering.
It's not.
It's not.
I'll leave it there
It's not
for now.
voluntary.
I'll have some follow-up conversations.
It's not voluntary. The sentence. Anything else?
No, thank you very much.
So we'll work with you. I want to make sure, you know, everyone's aware of that. And if you could let us know who you would like to have sit when we talk about this. So
Yeah, Tom Oliver would be
Okay.
for some stuff.
that would be great.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So is this bill something in of interest that the committee would like to work on?
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm a non-starter. I'm a no.
Do you want to do it? So we'll work,
Take it up so we can talk about it, right?
we'll work on getting,
Got a break time. I got a story for you.
we'll work on getting some folks in hopefully next week, maybe on this. Definitely. We'll reach out to DOC and the courts and the state's attorney and the defense counsel. They start looking at this, see if there's anything we can do. I know, Isaac will give you something. We're gonna be busy. So let's shift gears back to cash fund. So I had a conversation, as I said, with the chair of appropriations this morning. And instead of having a joint meeting to really go through this, we were both thinking 22 people is really gonna be difficult on such a complicated issue with so many little nuances. And she just also said, I don't have the time because they're just focused so much on the budget. We came up with a thought of having members of our committee and members of their committee really sit down with joint fiscal office, sit down with ledge council, and really go through current statute that establishes the cash fund and really figure out how you approach if there's money that was appropriated over 2 years ago and it has not gone out the door and it's not encumbered. What's that process? Because it needs to involve both committees because it's cash, it's general fund dollars. We don't have control of general fund dollars. Appropriations Committee has that. Just like bonded dollars, we make those decisions on bonded dollars. So we figured 4 people from our committee, 4 people from hers. And I was thinking the repo committee, because there's a lot of money right now in the cash fund that she was seeing that hasn't gone out the door. That really, we need to figure out how we're going to approach that. So I'm proposing, what I'd like to do is have the 3 members of the repo committee, because you're working on this, and myself, with the chair of appropriations committee, and then 3 members of her committee. And the 8 of us will sit down and really try to get our hands around this and try to figure how we go forward with. We may need to change the law around the cash fund. It's pretty complicated. And we really need to figure out, what do we do if there's a balance there that is not accounted, that is not encumbered and it's just sitting there for that. So that's what I'm proposing. That's what we're gonna do.
Is there any way I could be involved in that?
Well, I really want the repo committee because they're working right now with our reallocations. And they have a list of what is out there in the cash fund that hasn't gone out. So I want to bring that expertise to the table. Whatever is coming from this group of 8 has to come before our committee and her committee. So that's where everybody will start working on it. But I really want those 3 people who are working on the repo committee, because they're more aware of what's happening, how money's moving right now. And it's important for the 2 chairs, and it's important for the 2 chairs.
I'd like to step in there. I think Joe has a really good understanding of how the cash fund works. I'd like to see him part of that conversation.
Let's start with the repo committee and myself, and then the 4 folks from appropriations. Let's start there and have a conversation to lay the groundwork and see. And then everyone's going to be involved. I'm not going to keep people away from it. Everyone's going to be involved.
I respectfully take exception to that, but I understand you're the chair, so.
Yeah, I would say I understand what the proposal, what the thought is. And I understand having different voices in this because I think that different people have different understandings of it, that's for sure.
Mhm.
And if it's everybody that has the same understanding going in, I'm not so sure we're going to get, this is not a negative, it's just a reality. People have biases. And if we don't have people involved that have different points of view, what comes out and maybe is presented to us is just regurgitated to what's already believed. And I don't know. I don't know how else to say it, but it's
I think it's maybe time to get some fresh eyes on this.
I'm very concerned.
I understand what people are saying, and you're talking about the raw politics of this. We've got a balance here. We have an independent, we have a Democrat, and we have a Republican. And the Appropriations Committee is going to do the same thing. We're very clear about that we want a balance of folks politically at the table. We're not going to say, no, your voices aren't included.
Right, but it seems to me like repo could just say, approach could send the same people that are on their repo.
They don't have a repo. They don't have a.
Don't you guys work with appropriations for repo?
No,
No?
we're not doing cash right now.
Yeah, I gotcha.
We're doing capital.
I'm not concerned about party.
Yeah, I don't think it's a party
I
thing
don't
at all.
look at it as.
It'd be helpful to bring her to the the groups meeting, maybe have a half-hour discussion amongst ourselves. So when they go into it, they feel like they have a good sense of how the committee feels.
Sure.
And then that maybe feels like more voices are represented with them going in. It's a,
Sure, because what Robin put out, her schedule is really, really tight. And we're planning on meeting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for the 8 folks for that, just as talk with JFO and talk with Legislative Council to, get the lay of the land with that. So we've got 20 minutes here before our 10 o'clock blew up. People, we can have that conversation now. What kind of this?
And so how do you do conversations in here? Should we still be raising hands? Because I was gonna ask Joe something, but I'm not sure what's appropriate.
It's just
Joe?
stop.
Yeah, so
We're gonna do a conversation as a committee
it's good. Yeah.
in terms of what are people's perceptions or thoughts. Let's have it.
Yes, I wonder just like, are you gonna bring expertise and that's why you want to be there? I mean, I'm sure you would, or is there some point of view if you're not there that you want us to represent for you?
Well, I hate to feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I mean, we've seen testimony from the treasurer that there's an effort to reduce the state's bonded indebtedness. Treasurer Pierce believed the state had too much bonded indebtedness. And so as a consequence, and this year is not an exception, we're going to increasingly see that our capital needs getting less bonded dollars. Now, bonded dollars encumber future appropriations committees because they're paid by the treasurer and they come off the top before appropriations gets to do its work. And traditionally, we've seen numbers between 4.3 and 6% of the general fund is what those bond payments represent. The proposal on the table right now is for capital needs, cash, and bonded dollars or bonded indebtedness, not bonded dollars, to represent 4% of the general fund. And the formula for that would be 4% of general fund less bonded indebtedness for the year equals cash fund available. This is the third fiscal year we're going into for the cash fund. And as we've seen, this 4% formula, we're in no danger of running out of capital needs. Right? The 4%, we might tread water from what I can see, and that's without getting into things like the big ticket items, and we know what they are, or know what some of them are. We probably don't know what they all are. And so I think that the argument that for that cash fund to have kind of the same privileges as the bonded dollars is not encumbering appropriations any more than the current system, whereby appropriations is seeing in excess of that 4% go away before they even do their work. Whether it's cash or a bonded dollar, there's really no difference. And in fact, they're being less encumbered. The danger is that at some point in time, the Corrections and Institutions Committee might become just a corrections committee because it's not going to have any money to do its work with. From a perspective of public policy, I think it makes sense that we're trying to move towards doing things in cash, because wherever the dollars are spent, state dollars are not being spent on paying interest to some outside party. They're being spent on actual things the state of Vermont needs. I'm just concerned that this committee loses its ability to, do its mission, which is capital needs.
Yeah, that's understood. Thanks.
We're just weighing in broadly here.
Yeah.
It's I'd go probably even higher level than the proposal in front of us, just with the cash fund. And I'd start by saying I agree with a lot of what's been said. It's good fiscal stewardship to be paying this off over time, like a credit card. I like that analogy there. You should pay cash when you can. And I think if you look, we've got a storm coming down the pike, so especially it's prudent to do that now. I think formalizing it is something I would object to philosophically to an extent, because what I see it as one branch of government exerting control over another one with the discipline of applying a particular number to it there and sort of dictating what committee has jurisdiction over what. Now, I know it's in our hands ultimately, but I feel like we can still achieve the same thing without trying to tie future legislators to this. I think it's a fairly arbitrary number, the cash fund number. When I mean, I've been in the building long enough. If they need the money downstairs, they're going to get the money. If it's a 2008 recession, they're going to take that money. If it's COVID, it's coming out. So part of it makes me feel like it's an imaginary process we're going through that's ideological or idealistic. I'm sorry, that we would bind future legislatures to sort of following in the steps. I think it's good policy. I don't like formalizing it. I think we should be trying to do this. But I think we got to work with our committees. And as much as I love the work we do, if they're in a bind in appropriations at the end, which it feels like they always are, I like having the flexibility to move money to help them out if we can.
See, I'm of the mind that that's the complete opposite.
I thought you might be.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many capital projects that we're facing that, we're gonna have super glue and duct tape budget left if we don't try to codify this transfer. And you're right, it does bind future legislatures, but not for a necessarily altruistic reason. It gives this committee that has the knowledge of what the capital needs are more control over the cash and can hopefully prevent the creep of programmatic needs or other needs of appropriations from creeping in here and taking the money out. So that's where I'm at.
And to jump on that, I would say that they're already bound because they have to pay the debt service. We're trying to make it so the debt service eventually goes away, but that same amount of money or similar stays here. So there is no difference in what they're bound to do. It's or the amounts, but it's what it's going for. Is it going to go pay somebody else's interests and obviously the loan itself, or is it going to directly pay for our needs? And I think everybody is aware, even if we were just here for the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that the amount of deferred maintenance in the state, and you can go to every other committee, as I said the other day, we are so far behind. To use that cliche, we almost think we're first, and we can't allow the creep. We have to protect the money from going elsewhere. Where yes, it may be needed, but unfortunately, that just adds to the problem the state has accumulated over the last 30 years of falling farther and farther behind in the things that we need to infrastructure of all sorts. So anyway, yeah.
Even this capital bill versus the one from 2 years ago has less money available in it without adjusting for inflation of the projects we're looking at. And beyond that, it has requests in it that really don't belong in the capital bill at all. We saw a little bit from Mr. Farrell yesterday. Not that they don't have merit, they're just not capital bill projects. So this capital bill is a case in point as to why those dollars, be they cash or bonded, should be sacrosanct.
Other folks?
I'll just say, I know Joe's definitely got a good grasp of this. So I do think that he represents he represents us pretty well, but I understand that you're trying to keep it even with the two groups, but I do think that he does bring a tremendous amount of financial knowledge to this, to this situation. So more than I could ever do. So I just, for what it's worth.
Swap Mary out for Joe?
I want. I'd really like the repo committee because part of this is really figuring out on the cash fund, when you have money that is 2 years old, more than 2 years old, and it's sitting there and it hasn't been encumbered, what is the process in terms of looking at that? And who should be involved in a reallocation? Because the general fund, the appropriations committee, they do, it's called carry forward, or they then incorporate if money that they've put towards a program hasn't gone out, that money is then calculated within their current state budget. For us, it's calculated within the capital bill. So both committees really need to figure out, because we're connected. When you're talking cash and you're talking projects, we're connected. So we need to figure out how we go forward with those general fund dollars that are targeted to construction projects that haven't gone out the door. And we need to be part of that discussion, just like appropriations does, because some of that cash is connected to a project that we've also bonded dollars for. So we need to figure out, there is no process in place right now. So we need to figure that out with both committees. So that's where I'm coming from for that.
For me, whether we do or do not do this, a change policy, what I really want to reinforce, and I hope that it is that everybody goes in with an open mind and understands just because we have done something some way, doesn't mean it has to be that way. It also doesn't mean it has to change. But if anybody goes in with, well, that's the way we've done it, and that's just how it is, that would be a problem to me. But
And what are you referring to specifically?
no, just in general, like how, if we're looking to change this policy, the proposals to change this policy. Just to go in open-minded and saying, like, listen, yes, this is how we have done it in the past. It's the way we appropriate, allocate, et cetera. But we're looking at, can we change it? Should we change it? Maybe we don't, and that's okay. But as long as everybody goes in saying, well, it's a possibility. It's like, as simple as that. There's no more deeper message there. It's just like, if everybody goes in saying, like, listen, we have done it this way. It's just this how its history is, but we could change it. At the end may say, no, we're not going to. That's cool. As long as everybody goes in and understanding it doesn't have to be the way it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think people are approaching it like that.
Okay.
I think.
I'm not saying anybody isn't. I'm just saying that that's a philosophy thing.
Well,
I mean, I feel like I don't really have a full opinion on this. I mean, because I can kind of see, and maybe I'm thinking of this too simplistic, but if we were to move fully, or at least mostly, to cash fund, that eliminates the interest that would be paying in some of these bonded projects. But alternatively, if we move to a cash fund, then we're a little bit more subjected to what the revenues of the state are in that particular year. We wouldn't, so if we had a bad year, we have projects we have to fund, we may not have the same capacity that we did. So I can see both sides to it. So I'm open to hearing, more about it, but that's just kind of the two general tracks I'm seeing with it as pros and cons.
Try not to put you on the spot. How you feeling about it?
I had a brief conversation with the chair this morning. I'm kind of agnostic right now on it. I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I can certainly understand the argument that the administration is making on this. I'm more worried, and this hasn't, I hate to bring in a new topic or a new component into the conversation. I'm more worried about that up to language that they also want us to change. Right now, the statute reads that appropriations can transfer up to 4% minus the bond repayment. And they want to make that a definitive shall 4% kind of thing. I like the flexibility that gives us right now. As we're talking about, does this capital bill need all this cash? And when we did it last year, we handed some cash back to appropriations that had been originally recommended by the governor. I like that flexibility. I'm open to, once the cash is given to us and once we decide what that amount is, up to 4%. Right, I know right now how much money is at that 2-year mark in cash that we have allocated. I would like to have a lever to keep that still within the capital bill and not necessarily automatically revert back to the general fund. Right now, that's what we're kind of playing with. So I'm more worried about that up to language, keeping that, preserving that to give us some flexibility on the front end.
Sure,
And then playing around with what does it mean when,
once it's here.
yeah, that's,
I totally.
and I don't have a decision on that, but that's where my head is right now.
Yeah,
Especially the last part. I agree with the up to, but the having money and then 2 years later where you no longer control it, it automatically goes back. I just want that looked at.
Yeah.
I know you will. I know Brian will. I know Alex will.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Mary
it
will.
would stay, it stays in the fund now.
Right now, it goes to the fund. After 2 years, the language is may go back to the fund.
Yeah.
This is
5 years.
changing it to align more with what repo is doing is there is 2 and 5. Is it 2 and
That's
5?
what the repo is doing, 2 and 5.
Yeah.
Currently, right now, for the cash fund, if there's any unexpended dollars, the money stays in that fund.
Yeah,
Cash fund, it's really not clear. Then what's the next step? And it's not clear about who reviews this. I mean, it just sits there. And you could have $30 million is sitting there because nothing's gone out the door. And if you don't have a process in terms of, you can't just have cash just sitting there when you've got construction needs and you've got needs all over. So that's where I'm coming from is how do we go forward in terms of, in terms of what's the structure there for this? We didn't think about that. Was first established. And quite often when a new program is established about 2 or 3 years later, when it starts playing out, you got to go back and tweak it. And that's where I'm coming from. We've got some experience here. We've got money that's, I think, has not gone out the door. Because there's also another sub-account in this cash fund that isn't even in our jurisdiction. And there's a lot of money sitting in that account, according to Representative Shy, because she has documents as well. And they're trying to figure out what to do with, because there's a sub-account there that doesn't deal with the capital bill. So it's just time to really look at this and figure out what do you do with money that hasn't been encumbered and not have it just sit there.
right.
For that. So that's the angle I'm approaching it as. It's time to take a look and tweak in terms of how do you have it viable going forward?
Totally.
That's where I'm coming from.
And I just think that it should stay within the purview of our committee. As far as where that money needs to go back to, if it needs to go back, or if we have more pressing needs for capital projects.
So what I'm hearing is to protect our projects, make sure we have a voice as a committee. And be transparent about it.
Yep.
Does that sum it up pretty well
Yeah. Definitely.
for that? Nothing is gonna be put in stone from us meeting tomorrow. It's really just getting the lay of the land and trying to figure out how we go forward. And it's gonna come back, whatever we talk about will be coming back to the full committee. I mean, this isn't gonna be working in isolation.
It's a process.
It's a process for that.
But you said something. No.
Oh, good.
Okay. So we are scheduled now to shift gears to talk about H32. Is not everyone from DOS is here?
Yeah, Eva's gonna be here in just a second.
Okay, so why don't we just take a quick break? 5 minutes or so, because we're a little early,
you want to look at my note?
and then we can walk a few too. Hold on, folks, we're live.